Welcome back to another live, kicking off a couple 30 seconds early here. But my name is Joseph Lewin, and I'm joined by Vincent Mintz, the founder of Three Nails InfoSec, and Carlos Guerrero, the senior compliance executive from 360 Advanced. And today we're going to be talking about compliance. And for a lot of companies, compliance can just be a checkbox, and Carlos doesn't really view it that way. So I'm just going to kick it off, Carlos, with what should people know about doing compliance the right way so that they don't just check the box?
Well, I think that first of all, the right way probably comes from having a particular attitude or approach just about maybe even your business in general, and that sort of ends up being also about compliance. So you want to build compliance or build a program like your business that aligns with a particular framework, so that eventually compliance attestations and certifications and those sort of things just end up coming out of that framework that you've already built. So it's not necessarily you're not necessarily doing a fire drill every time, but you've actually kind of built a program where compliance can be an output. But I'll say that with one caveat: businesses a lot of times are just trying to build their business, and so they get into a deal with maybe a client that is, or a customer that is asking them to have a SOC 2, for instance. And so then they go looking for a SOC 2. So sometimes, it's just, that's just the way it is. But I think, in an ideal world, you would build an InfoSec and a compliance program kind of in tandem from the beginning, aligning with a framework and creating, a system so that, that compliance can just be something that comes from that, if that makes sense.
Carlos, will you give me an example, in your opinion, of what doing compliance the wrong way is? You gave me a good idea of what, a right way might look like, but I'm interested in hearing what does it look like to do it wrong? How can,
Well,
go ahead.
no, yeah, I appreciate the question. So doing it wrong or in a way that maybe isn't as helpful to your business, right? I mean, you may certainly get an outcome short term that you desire, but maybe not the long term outcome, which is really what you should be more focused on. So, for instance, if a company comes to you and says, you have to have a SOC 2 or we're not going to be able to do business with you, you could, try to, go out and find someone to help you do that, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Or you could find partners and maybe a firm to work with that is, more interested in helping you not only to achieve this compliance measure, but help you build a foundation and a program so that other compliance efforts can come out of that. And the byproduct of that should be that you are just improving your overall business and reducing risk, including your cybersecurity risk. So I think that's the thing. If I would leave you with is that getting it done fast and then cheap and down and dirty, that sort of may achieve a short-term goal. But if you want to build a program around future success, then it's better to consider doing things or hiring companies and working with partners that put a little bit more effort into helping you to take a risk-based approach into the compliance attestation, as opposed to what we might call in the industry more check the box.
You said something about more like benefit in the future, or
Yeah.
Can you kind of tell me what that means exactly?
Yeah, for sure. So you can imagine that, even if, say, the only compliance output that you need to do is a SOC 2, but it could be ISO 27001, it could be PSI or high trust, for instance. But let's say it's SOC 2 and that's it. Like every single year, you're going to have to go through this, right? And so if you are smart about the way that you approach compliance, in this case SOC 2, then you will choose partners, like I said, it depends on who's actually your assessor. Truthfully, you choose partners that will, kind of push you a little bit and help you to continue to get better year over year. And then, you just build a program around that. Otherwise, what can happen a lot of times is when it comes time for, let's say, your SOC 2, then there tends to be a bit of a fire drill, and a lot of the employees that are usually taking on other tasks end up also taking on compliance. And so then there becomes a little bit of what they call audit fatigue, because people are having to do dual jobs. Where if you can build a program that is really more of an annual program, then hey, when it comes SOC 2 time, gathering all that evidence and making sure that you're meeting with your auditors and kind of getting things streamlined, it's just that much easier. So you can reduce some friction that way. But again, the more important thing, in my opinion, is that by doing that, you're improving your program year over year, meaning your InfoSec program, meaning your entire business, because a lot of the things that folks are looking at with SOC 2, I mean, it's certainly cybersecurity related, but you're looking at most of your policies and procedures and HR function and change management and those sort of things.
Apologies for this curveball question, but
That's all right, man.
how can a customer know that the firm that they're being audited by is the right one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of times, I mean, I hesitate in some ways saying right, because, it's all about where you are with your particular circumstances. But I think that I would, when you're interviewing, firms to do your compliance work, I'd look in some ways look at fees, right? Because if you are interviewing 3 firms and one's really, really low, you got to have to sort out why, because this work tends to take a lot of time, and so there might be some cutting of corners. But I would also see if you could spend some time talking to the executives of that firm, people that are actually going to be doing the work, and so that it just becomes a little bit more relationship based as opposed to being entirely transactional. I mean, you can get a quote for most of these type of services by filling out a questionnaire, but the only way you're going to know if you're aligning well with the company that's going to be assessing you is to spend some time with them and ask them questions, and to get a good feel if that partnership is good for everyone involved. I mean, that's where I've experienced the more long lasting relationships and business partnerships, because an auditor can be a trusted advisor, even in the capacity of being a third party independent auditor.
That was awesome. Yeah, great. Well said there. How can let's assume you've got your auditing firm nailed down, and
Yep.
you're working on defining your compliance strategy. How can a well-defined compliance sort of plan reduce risk overall?
No, that's great. That's a great question. I think that if with all compliance initiatives are going to be asking questions typically around what you're doing and not doing, as in regards to things like I said, like change management or HR function or password policies, and all of these different things. But I think in terms of reducing overall cybersecurity risk, doing compliance just by itself is probably only going to get you part of the way there. That's why it's important to have executives, regardless of the size of your company, to be looking at compliance and security kind of together, right? You figure that you're accomplishing these compliance goals, and that ends up in some ways being a baseline. But if you're then looking at other types of threats or risk, and deciding, do we need to spend money there, or can we accept that risk and move on? If you're constantly having those questions within the organization, then you're eventually going to just increase your security posture and reduce your risk. But I would say that the most important thing is to have the tone at the top, so that attitude is coming from the top down, and people are just really informed, and they give their people that are working for them the liberty to inform them, right? And so once you do that and you break down certain silos within the organization, I think you can start to streamline around just having good visibility into total risk, and then also where what cyber risk or where cyber risk plays a role in that, if that makes sense.
I have a thought, Vince. So Carlos, you're talking about kind of breaking down those silos and getting people to work together. I mean, that's pretty common across almost any industry, any department. You get those challenging silos. So
that's right.
What have you seen help break down some of those silos between folks that are really more focused on the compliance side versus security? And what have you seen work to kind of get those two groups to work together?
That's such an excellent question. And you're right, that does go across industry. And I imagine you go and talk to anyone in, whatever field they're in, and especially in legacy large businesses, you're going to see the same problems. But to answer your question about what I've seen to be successful, is where people on both or on various aspects of the business are given the ability to be curious about what other departments are doing so they can spend some time in those departments. And I will also say that you're seeing this more and more, but it's really important that leadership on the security side, which often handles compliance, frankly, the way things are structured right now, is if they are cognizant on understanding the business, like how the business makes money and how to kind of help support that, as opposed to just locking things down and protecting things from like maybe their old engineer background, then what that's going to do is just facilitate conversations, bidirectionally across these silos. And I think that's where that starts to manifest itself into an organization that is kind of working across the various silos. I think that's something that I've seen people or hear people talking about, and it seems to be the leaders or executives that are doing that in this day and age, and tend to be a lot more successful because they can speak to the business on business terms, as opposed to just only thinking about things from a security standpoint.
Carlos, what are some common misconceptions in the industry surrounding compliance that might cause more risk in the environment, or backfire potentially?
Well, from what I've seen is that when security departments or folks that are doing security kind of think of compliance kind of as a drag, essentially, right? Or maybe as the little brother that's not getting a seat at the table, then what tends to happen is that everyone within the organization kind of has that same attitude or frustration about compliance. But when they start to understand and talk to their people about this, that being compliant does two things, right? It helps to, again, improve your security posture eventually, and it sort of kind of just makes your business better, but it also allows you to go to market with less friction, which then provides more resources so that you can do things within your organization to continue to help protecting. And so I think just thinking about compliance for what it is in terms of being a business enabler, but also the side benefit of helping the organization, like I said, strengthen their posture and get better over time. I think when people are thinking about things in those terms, then that's going to reduce friction and therefore reduce risk, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, compliance is about security, right? It's not just about are you checking this box? It's actually designed initially to make sure companies are doing what they need to do to secure their environments, secure
100%.
their data,
100%. And think about it like this, Vince. So we're in the business of helping businesses create trust between the people that they do business with, right? You hear words like assurance, like, so, company X needs to be assured that you're doing the best that you can, or at least meeting a certain bar, you know, with your cybersecurity, because you're handling one another's data, right? And so I think that you can't underestimate in a world where we're leveraging vendors for a lot of business critical services. You got to imagine that, man, if we have 40 vendors, and that's a small number, right, for some organizations, 40 vendors, and we have no idea what their cybersecurity posture is. I mean, how are you going to take that to then your executives and say, yeah, we're totally locked down? Because really, being locked down in this day and age has as much to do with what your partners are doing and orgs that are in the supply chain as it is what you're doing specifically within your four walls.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Something we've seen in the past, doing compliance audits and such is, a client has to comply and meet a certain regulation. So they have to buy this specific technology or something along those lines. But those technologies, if not implemented correctly, can introduce new vulnerabilities, new issues that often seem overlooked. Do you ever run into that yourself? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, man, I think about that a lot. I think that I think that for the longest time in security, and this kind of worked its way into compliance too, is that organizations, would have large checkbooks in order to buy technological solutions. They could say, we've bought, brand X, and push that up the chain, and people are going to say, oh, I recognize brand X. We must be safe. But what they're not necessarily paying attention to is, one, like, what does this whole technology stack look like, and is it bloated, and do we know where everything is? Do we have way too much stuff, which is super risky? Or to your point, is it misconfigured? Has it not been set up at all? I mean, what's the state of the technology? And I think that's why you're seeing more and more organizations really lean into people and process, and not just the brand name of the technology in order to save the day. And in our world, in compliance, 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of companies took to the marketplace in order to help smaller businesses, especially to become compliant. But what we've found is that although that can certainly work well, and they can introduce different businesses to different auditors, and it can go well. But also, on the flip side, what we run into sometimes is that these software platforms have been purchased with kind of people have been sold that if we basically put this thing in place, then we're good. But all of us know that technology doesn't work that way. If you're not setting things up correctly, if you don't have power users, if you don't have it built into the program or the culture of the business, then it just can, in best case, be shelfware, and worst case, be a complete risk, like you're talking about.
Do you think having a relationship with your vendor is significant in sort of that role, playing the role of securing your appliances correctly and things like that? Or do you think there's not really a lot of correlation between how well an appliance is implemented and sort of the practitioner doing it?
Yeah, I think having a relationship with your vendor is extremely important. And I think what folks are doing now, especially on the technology front, is they're digging deeper, and they're not just accepting what's on surface value in terms of features and benefits and those sort of things. The buyers are digging a little bit deeper. But I would also say, and I mean, I'm a little bit biased here because of the work that we do, but I think that there's been a rise in professional services, and not just software platforms. I think people are hiring third-party experts to come in for reassurance, for validation, for guidance, for partnership. I think and I kind of consider the auditor as a service provider in a similar way. But I think having those relationships are really, really important, especially if they're not necessarily tied to any of the specific products. They're more, a little bit more independent. And so I think we're seeing more in that, more and more of that. And you hear fractional CISO, vCISO, those sort of things. But I think that's gonna continue.
Well, I'll wrap up with the final thought. And I love that you're emphasizing the relationship, because ultimately, my belief, our belief at Three Nails, and it seems like your belief system sort of aligns, is just that the relationship is the most important aspect, right? And you can build the rest of the empire right on top of that relationship if it's founded properly. And so that connection between you and your client is super important for transparency reasons, and being able to truly improve your overall posture and have that sort of synergy between both parties. So, Carlos, thank you so much for coming on the show. Joe, thanks for hosting, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you on at some point in the future. So thanks for sharing everything there is to know on compliance.
This has been a blast, guys. I really, really appreciate you bringing me on. And everyone out there in LinkedIn land, don't hesitate to connect and follow up. And I'm happy to talk shop and network with folks.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Carlos.
Right on.